News.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
on TV,
on radio and online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
news channel.
Very good morning. Welcome to a brand new show here on GB News. Bev Turner today. 2 hours of frank conversations with fearless guests. We've got three of them today. Renee Hoedekamp, Dr. Renee Hoedekamp. Scarlett Maguire is also here. You'll be familiar with Scarlett. And Alan Miller, who has made it just in the nick of time despite the best efforts of the weather and London traffic. Well done, Alan. Broken Britain, ladies and gentlemen. We've got loads to talk about this morning, including striking nurses. One of the hardest jobs there is, of course, but do nurses need an almost 15% pay rise when everyone in the private sector is also struggling? Do you support their planned strike? Our Prime Minister and Emmanuel Macron took a break from eating $100 beef medallions at COP27 to discuss the illegal migrant crossings. And now Sunak is talking tough about an imminent solution. Do you have faith that he's willing to fix the mess? And Boris behaving badly. What's new? By announcing he would attend COP, he effectively forced our Prime Minister to go as well. Is he going to be a perpetual pain in Sunak's neck? That's all coming up after the latest news with Rosie.
A very good morning. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 10. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Prime Minister's considering raising state pensions and benefits in line with inflation. Rishi Sunak and the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt are also considering imposing up to £60 billion in tax rises and spending cuts in the autumn budget next week. Mr Sunak will meet with his cabinet on Tuesday to find departmental savings. The Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Jonathan Ashworth says the Conservatives are finally following their manifesto commitments.
We're calling on the government to honour the promise that they made. It's a manifesto commitment for the Conservative Party, but it's a promise that Rishi Sunak made less than 6 months ago. And indeed, my opposite number, Mel Stride, he's now the Work and Pensions Secretary, just over a month ago he was saying we should inflation-proof both universal credit and the basic state pension. So we're just holding them to their promise.
Sir Gavin Williamson reportedly told a senior civil servant, "Slit your throat," while he was Defence Secretary. The Guardian's reporting that Sir Gavin made the remarks in front of colleagues in a meeting and on another occasion told them to jump out of the window. Scrutiny's mounting on the Prime Minister's decision to reinstate Mr Williamson into the Cabinet after it became clear that Rishi Sunak was aware of additional bullying allegations. Sir Gavin denies the new claims. Boris Johnson has asked the MPs he's nominated for peerages to delay taking them so they don't trigger by-elections in their constituencies. Nadine Dorris and Alex Sharma are amongst those that the Times are reporting to have been given the honours. The Conservatives are currently behind the Labour Party in most official opinion polls. Millions of Americans will head to the polls today for the midterm elections. Currently, the Democrats control both chambers of the House of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. If the Republicans take either, it will limit President Joe Biden's ability to pass any laws. Well, President Biden has warned that a Republican victory could weaken the country's democratic institutions.
Today, we face an inflection point, one of those moments that comes around every 3 or 4 generations. We know in our bones that our democracy is at risk, and we know that this is your moment to defend it, preserve it, protect it, choose it. The power's in your hands. You're one of the reasons why I've never been more optimistic about America's future. Look, America's reasserting ourselves, leading the world in the 21st century. As I've traveled this country and the world, I see great nation because I know we're a good people.
Well, meanwhile, the former US President Donald Trump has given his biggest hint yet that he'll be running for the White House again.
This is the year we're going to take back the House, we're going to take back the Senate, and we're going to take back America. And in 2024, most importantly, we are going to take back our magnificent White House. I'm going to be making a very big announcement on Tuesday, November 15th at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida.
The Head Teachers Union has warned more than half of England's schools are planning catastrophic staff redundancies. The National Association of Head Teachers says it's due to government underfunding and rising costs. A survey of over 11,000 school leaders in England found 2/3 of head teachers will have to make teaching assistants redundant or reduce their hours. Half of respondents also say they're looking at reducing the number of teachers or teaching hours. Millions of people on low income will receive payments of £324 from today as part of the government's cost of living support. There's no need to apply for the scheme. Those eligible will automatically receive it. The government support package also includes a £400 discount on energy bills paid in monthly instalments between now and March. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has announced the Scottish Government will put £5 million in to tackle loss and damage caused by climate change in developing countries. Speaking at the COP27 Climate Summit in Egypt, she announced the boost in funding, following on from the £2 million pledged during last year's summit in Glasgow. The money will come from the Scottish Government's Climate Justice Fund. Hundreds of women are to benefit from a new breast cancer drug which targets one of the most aggressive forms of the disease. It's 1,600 patients in England with triple-negative breast cancer who'll be offered the drug. Researchers found that taking it increases the chance of cancer disappearing and the length of time before it returns. The King will today unveil a statue of his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, during a 2-day visit to Yorkshire. King Charles will begin in Bradford before being joined by the Queen Consort tomorrow in York. The tour will end with a ceremony where the royal couple will officially confer city status on Doncaster. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now, back to Beverly.
Good morning, this is Bev Turner today on GB News. Lots of things to talk about this morning. First things first, though, my very important panel. Dr Renee Houdekamp is here, NHS GP, and possibly the only media medic who is not told what to say by Big Pharma. Accurate, Renee? Thank you. Scarlett Maguire, an experienced political pundit and former Labour Party advisor. Lovely to have you here, Scarlett. And Alan Miller, who, after years of working in the hospitality industry, co-founded the Together Association after COVID lockdowns. And as always, I want to hear from you. Get in touch as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'll get to as many of your messages as I can throughout the show. Now, we clapped for them on the doorstep during the pandemic and we called them frontline heroes. But it turns out, who knew they needed more than just clapping after all? In the next few days, the Royal College of Nursing will announce the result of its ballot for industrial action. The General Secretary, Pat Cullen, has said, and I quote, huge numbers of staff, both experienced and newer recruits, are deciding they cannot see a future in a nursing profession that is not valued nor fairly treated. Now, a nursing walkout would affect non-urgent but not emergency care, and the RCN has called for a 5% above inflation pay rise, which no nation in the UK has been willing to meet as yet. So are nurses right to take such drastic action? Let me turn to you, Renee. They do the most important job.
Of course they do.
Very few of us would be prepared to do that work. It is hard, it is emotional. So maybe we just need to pay them more.
Look, in an ideal world, of course we need to pay them more. We need to pay everybody more without a shadow of a doubt. And you're right, nurses are there at the forefront and they do a job which is incredibly hard. But actually, I think the interesting quote there from Pat Cullen was that they need to be valued, and they're not valued. And when I say that, I'm not saying they're not valued by the people or the public. They're not valued by the NHS. And this is one of the fundamental problems in the NHS. We don't value our staff. So staff are just used and abused constantly. They don't see a future. They don't know how to change things. They don't know how to actually go to work and really enjoy it because they're just being hammered by a system that is broken.
But what does that look like? What do you mean they're not valued? Because we really, it's £500,000 that's spent on apps for meditation for NHS staff recently. Is that the kind of thing that's meant to make them feel valued? It's meant to, though, isn't it? Isn't that the point?
Well, it's meant to. They probably don't have time to do it, to be fair.
I thought that.
I mean, come on. I think what we need is an NHS system that works and we have boots on the ground and not 48% of our staff in the NHS being non-clinical. That's what we've got at the moment. And we've got a massive vacancy situation from every single angle that you look at in the NHS. And it's OK filling in for your colleague for a few days. That's fine. But when you know that you're filling in for a few of your colleagues permanently, there aren't going to be those staff there. That's not feeling valued. That's feeling actually used and abused. So actually, I think the crux here is not pay. It's actually going back to basics, dismantling this broken NHS and putting it back together in a way from the ground up that sees enough staff everywhere. And to do that, you've got to train more. You've got to take away this removal of the bursary, so put it back so that nurses can go to university and actually afford to live while they do it. Stop this obsession with degrees. Yes, some nurses can have degrees and that's fine. I'm not saying they're not valuable, but we don't need all nurses to have degrees. So some people are put off being a nurse when they really would like to be one because they have to have a degree. So let's go back to a 2 or 3 tier system of how we train more, and then, yes, let's pay them fairly, but not 15% above inflation.
It feels like the wrong time to do it. I think you've got all the nuance in there, Renee. Scarlett, you don't mind me saying, because I did ask, you're currently having cancer treatment, aren't you? So you're presumably seeing nurses at the coalface.
I'm seeing massively overworked nurses, because the other thing about cancer is because of COVID, I mean, lots and lots of diagnoses were missed. So there's masses of people coming in for chemo. I mean, I'm at University College London Hospital, and the last time I was in there, I hope the last time ever, somebody came and complained that they'd been waiting for an hour and a half, as we all do. And the nurse said, well, you know, the problem is there's 70 people in, and there shouldn't be. And he said, well, can't you reschedule? And she said, no, because you have to have chemotherapy. Tomorrow there's 90, Friday there's 92. I mean, it is incredible. You talk to the nurses and they are just, I mean, these are probably better paid nurses. They're specialist nurses. They are amazing. But, I mean, they're just on their feet. I mean, that's the other thing is the pure physical. And then you have to get it right. Every time you have to get it right. I mean, you know, a mistake there and you're so I think 15% is a negotiating thing. Obviously, there's no question about that like the trained people, they're going to accept less. But I actually think I agree with most of Renee's arguments. I just don't agree with her conclusion. I mean, you know, we can't say we really value the NHS, we really value the people who work in the NHS, but we're only going to give them a tiny pay rise. They have to get a decent pay rise. We know we have nurses going to food banks, right? We know that in this cost of living crisis that nurses are really, really worried about paying their bills. And not just nurses, the technicians. I mean, it is amazing.
Am I right in thinking nurses will still get final salary pensions? Am I right in thinking that? I think they still, don't they, in the civil service? They get a good pension.
They get a good pension. If they're in the NHS pension and they have long years of service because of the way it's structured, then they'll get a good pension. I don't think it's final salary.
Right.
It's on your last 3 years of earnings, and then it's a percentage. It's complex.
So they do have more future security than maybe some people who are working in the private system. I'm just trying to look at this on the balance of what they're getting now, what they're going to get in the future.
But what's interesting is how many nurses you meet who are even over 40, right? I mean, actually, that's the worrying thing is that we have...
The younger nurses aren't coming through.
Well, the older nurses aren't staying.
Oh, they are staying, but they're going into management.
Yeah, and the ones that don't go into management go, right? I mean, that is the problem, is that you say, oh, yeah, but in the end, they're fine. But actually, you've got to last that long. And, I mean, it is really, really hard. I mean, it's work we expect them to do perfectly. And, you know, as Renee said, you can cover for somebody for a couple of days, but actually these nurses, they went through COVID, right, when they just worked and worked and worked, and often got COVID, right, and now always, I mean, you go to anywhere and they go, you know, we have a lot of people sick today. I mean, it is terrible.
Alan? What's the solution? I mean, I imagine you're listening to this and thinking, well, we always knew this was going to happen if we prioritised COVID above everything else in the NHS for 2 years.
Yeah, well, one of the problems with the COVID-only service was that it was not COVID itself, but it was the policy responses, the fact that people with cancer, heart disease, stroke, we saw a lot of them go from stage 1 to stage 4. We saw all different sorts of things, from acute diabetes, even dentist issues. And what that meant was a huge backlog, now 7 million people waiting to get treatment on the NHS. We also saw that the vaccine mandate that was threatened to the NHS staff, which, by the way, where were the unions representing the NHS workers then? There was only one, as it happens, the Workers of England union. But that also put enormous pressure, because we know that care workers were lost. So over 40,000 care workers were lost, which now we've got a situation where staff are under even more pressure on the front line, because there's people in beds that could be released that can't go there. I think we need to stop treating the NHS like a holy grail, like a deity. It was a remarkable contribution at the end of the Second World War, but it's there to serve us. And I think, I really concur with some of the things Rennie was saying. If you look, I mean, I think it was Dr. David Wrigley that was saying that we've actually had a lot of investment go in, but you get a lot of higher level management and bureaucrats doubling in size and doubling in fees, yet frontline staff at the coalface are not receiving that. This is about organisation and logistics. It's about execution. I happen to think that everyone in Britain should get paid more. I think we can have wealth creation for all. I'm not in that whole dichotomy of either you get this or we get this taken away. But we have to have a rational way of engaging it and not say, oh, this is a deity, you can't touch it. We see lots of issues going on with bureaucratic management. We've seen consistent policies that have had an impact. And I believe in the right for people to retrieve, to withdraw their labour. But actually what we've got to have is we've got to have an honest reckoning with this situation, right? We need to be able, the fact that the A&E services are so impacted because people aren't seeing GPs. All of this needs to be approached from a macro level. And obviously the people on the front line, I think in Britain, people have enormous sympathy with them.
I think we have got enormous sympathy with nurses. There's no doubt about it. And you never realise how much you need a nurse, right? Until you need a nurse. And when one of your family members needs a nurse. That's the thing. It's easy to just kind of think it's somebody else's problem. But if we start with the nurses, then who else is going to strike? If the nurses get a significant pay rise now, then what message does that send to the rest of the civil service, Renee?
Absolutely, and we're seeing reports this morning that now they're considering balloting the people who do the blood results and the blood testing, so that will slow down, and then diagnoses will take longer to get. I think it's about reading the room, and at the moment, we are in, as a country, as a world, a dire place. And in an ideal world, we would like all of these people to earn more, but now is not the time, and it's certainly not the time for nurses to go on strike. And I supported the junior doctors when they went on strike. I withdrew from the BMA because I was so disgusted by the way they were treated. But we have a backlog which is much more than 7 million. 7 million is the upfront. The hidden is probably 16 million. I see people now that I tell can't get an appointment for a year. So this is not the time. Read the room. Yes, go for a pay rise, but I think striking is wrong right now.
OK, right, super. Loads of your views are coming in. I'm going to be reading some of them after this quick break. But next, Rishi says that he's close to getting a grip on the migrant solution with more cooperation with the French and an army of drones. But will it work? Let me know what you think. GB Views at gbnews.uk. See you in a minute.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It stays breezy today and there will be further lines of showers rattling through. Some of these are going to be heavy with some thunder, but some drier interludes in between. Low pressure still in charge. Now that sent through a very active front last night. You might have been woken up if you were in the southwest or in Wales. There was some very noisy rain, some very strong winds associated with that, and the weather stays lively during the rest of the day. You can see how the bands of rain or showers are pushing in from the west and southwest, and it's always Wales and the southwest that will get the heaviest and most frequent downpours, but there'll be showers virtually everywhere, and some of these will be heavy with some rumbles of thunder. In between, a few sunny spells, but it stays blustery. 50-mile-per-hour winds near coast, 40 inland, and temperatures of 15 or 16 in the south, 11 to 13 further north. Now, through the evening, those showers just keep going. They'll come through at quite a pace during the hours of darkness. I think some clear spells in the east, but really around southern and southwestern shores in particular, those showers will just not stop through the night. On and off, but still with a gusty breeze accompanying them. That will keep things mild in the south. I think in the north of Scotland, that's the coldest spot overnight, 2 to 5 Celsius in some sheltered spots. Now we start off with some brightness on Wednesday, some sunshine. There will still be some showers coming through, especially in the west and increasingly around the north of England, Irish sea coast. But actually, there'll be fewer showers for many compared with today, and some sunshine coming through. So 14 or 15 Celsius, less breezy, feeling a bit more pleasant with those gaps in between the weather. Now into the evening on Wednesday, the showers will turn to persistent rain across western Scotland and perhaps Northern Ireland as well, some drizzly stuff here. A lot of cloud thickening towards the west and especially the northwest. That's a sign of a change for the second half of the week. It's going to be unsettled in the northwest, drier in the southeast and warmer for all.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Good morning, it is 10:23. You are watching and listening to Bev Turner today on GB News. OK, the French and the English have never really seen eye to eye when it comes to migrants crossing the Channel. That goes down as the understatement of the day. They seem to think it's our problem, and we think they should deal with the illegal immigrants before they even get into the small boats. Now, Rishi Sunak says that he's on the verge of reaching an agreement to stop the small boats invasion. We've heard this before, haven't we? Although he says there's not one simple solution, the Prime Minister has said that talks are now in their final stages. 40,000 people have crossed the Channel this year so far by this route. So is this the way forward? Alan Miller, let me come to you. What's going on here? This has been the biggest story, not just here on GB News, but in all the papers and all the radio stations. We've been talking about this, and it feels like we're being ramped up to what? Yes, it's a problem, of course it is, but I can't help but feeling that they could have done something before now. This cannot be the most difficult thing in the world to fix.
Well, I think we're seeing there's a lack of commitment. When you don't have a set of principles, and when you're always polling and looking at models and U-turning when you're under pressure from social media, and also, let's be honest, you don't necessarily feel like you've got the biggest democratic mandate because you keep changing the people that are running things, then there are some issues. But I do think...
It's a very short list of all the things we're getting wrong there, Alan.
Yeah. I do think commitment is the problem, right? So if you have a principle that you're going to do something and then you've won over the demos people, the public, to that, then you go and do it. No matter how shrill some comments are. When you don't do that, that's what the problem is. Now, there's clearly an issue. So there's a lack of commitment and a set of principles, and that has really reflected a lot of the things we've seen in the last few years. I also am very concerned about what Labour has announced today, that they would make compulsory ID something that somehow would resolve this. You see, the ID keeps coming up. Tony Blair was an advocate of it. The British public said no.
He still is. I mean, he said quite publicly, he's one of the few people who said biometric digital ID is coming whether you like it or not.
Right. And the Tony Blair Institute has been lobbying internationally and with the UK government, with the Conservative government. When you have technocrats, technocratic solutions seem like such a simple, nice thing. I think the question of our privacy, choice, autonomy are really important. We saw that during the last period of 2.5 years where we had vaccine passports and then people challenged that and they said they didn't want a papers, please society. And obviously it could be appealing, right? Oh, here's our solution to the problem of control of our borders. Not what we're going to do to implement some rigorous measures. It's a technocratic attempt to use technology, which actually the implications, ramifications for everyone are significant. We don't need to look at China, the social credit system. We can look at what happened with the truckers, with Trudeau, who decided to freeze bank accounts of anyone who supported them. We know the Aadhaar system in India and its implications for control. We also know in Britain people have been taken down with big tech from PayPal and other measures. The idea that we're all going to be on some kind of tech app that can be surveyed and controlled, maybe like in Oxford, if you overstep your 15 minutes in the car in the city centre, you get fined and you get shut down.
Absolutely. So, but there'll be a lot of people going, well, hang on a minute, I like that, Alan Miller, but what is he talking about? Because what we're talking about here are illegal immigrants trying to get here to either live a safe life, get a job, or commit crime. All of the above is applicable.
Yeah.
So help us to understand this, Renee. What is Alan saying? Why does he think this could have, I think what he's saying, it could have been stopped sooner, they haven't, and now the solution is going to be everybody that gets off that boat has a pass, a digital identification.
I mean, look, let's just go back historically. Governments, one after the other, Tory, Labour, have been trying to introduce ID for everybody for a long time and have never quite managed it. People have just said no, they didn't want it. So we then saw the push for it in COVID and they still didn't quite get it there because there were just still enough people saying, no, I don't want this. So now we have a migrant problem which seems to get worse day after day after day. The newspapers are screaming, as you say, the TVs and radio, and suddenly today Labour's solution is we need a digital ID system. And it's almost like you could predict the chaos has been invented in order to bring in the system. And I can't even see how it would work because none of these people are coming here with ID anyway. So you'd still have to prove where they've come from, why they've come, what their claim is to be here. I don't see that the rest of us in the country having ID will change that scenario one iota, but it will allow a government to introduce a system that it's wanted to introduce for decades.
And maybe the public will go with it, Scarlett, because maybe if there is enough sufficient, and I totally understand there are so many people angry about this. What was the latest figure on what we're spending per day on hope?
But there are other ways.
7 million.
Hold on, there are other ways of dealing with it. The real way of dealing with the small boats is actually having an immigration system that works. You don't put people up in hotels, right? What you do is you process them. I mean, and so that it takes weeks. We are now talking about people, asylum seekers, people who came to Britain to seek to be refugees because they were escaping. And lots of them are Syrian. We're now getting Afghans. I mean, there's no question that a lot of these people are desperate. They can take 5 or 6 years to find out. And in the meantime, we're putting them in hotels. I mean, actually, that's the first thing we should be doing, is we should be getting the system so that it works, so that you say, yes, are you a genuine asylum seeker? No, then you go home, right? End of. And then the thing about the small boats is it looks as though France isn't doing its business. But as somebody, I mean, I think it was your reporter said, if you go along the French coastal, you need a policeman every 10 yards, right? And it's a long way. And also, I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, people were coming over in trucks. And before that, they were coming over. There is no question that they will find other means. So actually, what we really, really need to do is we need to fix the immigration system so that we're processing processing people, and we're not putting people up for millions of pounds
but my
in hotels.
Concern, like Alan and Renee, and my concern is that Sunak will come out and go, we've got a solution, me and Macron have worked it out, we're going to fix it, we're putting everyone on a biometric ID as soon as they get off, we've read your eye, and then we're going to know exactly where you are. We just have to have the conversation about whether that is the solution that the rest of us who are already here are happy with, and in every country across the world.
And when you combine that with the other noises that are coming out yesterday and today about universal basic income, you almost, if you'd have said this 2 years ago, you would have been a conspiracy theorist. But let's get everybody on ID, universal basic income, and maybe a social credit system. You'll drive to a petrol pump and it will say, sorry, your carbon footprint has been exceeded.
Yeah. You've all been getting in touch with your messages. We were talking about nurses, weren't we, just before the break? And Anna has said, as a nurse who trained 43 years ago, recently retired, I think striking is wrong. You go into the job to care, knowing the pay isn't the best. The new nurses have degrees and they aren't as good as the old style without degrees. We were just discussing this. That's all your fault, Scarlett. Because that was under Tony Blair and you were working with him at the time, weren't you? You didn't advise him to do that, though, did you?
I certainly didn't. I think that you should have a two-tier system, that some nurses have degrees and some don't, and which is what actually in the old days
I know.
it was not SEN and SRN, wasn't it?
Not broken, don't fix it. Right, ladies. OK, we've got to move on. After the break, I'm going to be asking, is Boris behaving badly? He's turned up at COP27. Why? And are his comments undermining the Prime Minister on the world stage? That's after your news with Rosie.
Very good morning. It's 10:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Prime Minister is considering raising state pensions and benefits in line with inflation. Rishi Sunak and the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt are also considering imposing up to £60 billion in tax rises and spending cuts in the autumn budget next week. Mr Sunak will meet with his cabinet today to try to find departmental savings. Sir Gavin Williamson reportedly told a senior civil servant to slit your throat while he was Defence Secretary. The Guardian's reporting that Sir Gavin made the remarks in front of colleagues in a meeting and on another occasion told them to jump out of the window. Sir Gavin denies the new claims. Boris Johnson has asked the MPs he's nominated for peerages to delay taking them so they don't trigger by-elections in their constituencies. Nadine Dorris and Alok Sharma are amongst those that the Times are reporting to have been given the honours. The Conservatives are currently behind the Labour Party in most official opinion polls. Millions of Americans will head to the polls today for the midterm elections. Currently, the Democrats control both chambers of the Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. If the Republicans take either, it will limit President Joe Biden's ability to pass any laws. The Head Teachers Union has warned that more than half of England's schools are planning catastrophic staff redundancies. The National Association of Head Teachers says it's due to government underfunding and rising costs. A survey of over 11,000 school leaders in England found 2/3 of head teachers will have to make teaching assistants redundant or reduce their hours. We're on your TV, we're online and on your DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of the markets. The pound will buy you $1.1482 and €1.1481. The price of gold is £1,456.23 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,290 points.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Very good morning to you. It is 10:35. You are watching Bev Turner Today on GB News, and maybe you're listening on your radio as well. Now, a slight change of pace for you. Supermodel Cindy Crawford announced that she's hired a life coach. I mean, if she needs one, we all need one, right? Specifically to help guide her through the challenges of midlife. So this got us talking about whether we should be reassessing in midlife of what we need, what specific challenges do women in particular face during our midlife that require a little more attention. So I'm delighted to be joined in the studio now by an expert, Claire Davis. You are a midlife coach at Midlife Mentors. Hello, Claire.
Hello,
now,
lovely to be here.
Dr. Renee has a specialism in menopause. Scarlett said in the break, I went through menopause before it was fashionable. And Alan Miller knows about the menopause. Is that right? Which is a thing. We'll do another section on that one day.
The andropause is a real thing.
Is that right? OK. Claire, what kind of issues do people present with when they come to you midlife and say, I'm not coping?
I think the main thing is that when we hit midlife, it's almost like, I think everyone does go through it. I think we need to redefine what a midlife crisis is. I kind of like to call it a midlife transition.
What kind of age are we talking?
It can depend. We work with people from 40 actually through to about 65.
Yeah.
And I'd like to call it a midlife transition because I think we all go through it. And it's essentially where we question our identity. You know, we've had years and years and years of playing to win, getting the job, the house, the career, everything. And then at some point, we might look ahead at our future, at the second act of our life, and think, is this the trajectory of where I want to go? And people feel very lost.
Yeah. And in that period of life as well, you see, my kids are now 19, 11 and 13, and you start to come into that period where you're getting your freedom back, right?
Yeah.
And you assess life. Is this it? Is this as good as it gets?
There's the woman who didn't sleep worrying about her 19-year-old.
I was just going to say, I didn't sleep because my 19-year-old didn't come home, and he's now sent me a message during the break saying, I'm on my way home, Mum, so everything's all right. I can finally relax. So thanks a lot. I wish you'd told me at 1 o'clock this morning. But your stresses change, don't they, in your 40s and 50s? And often involves getting divorced, as was my case.
Yeah.
When you go, is this it? Is this it for the rest of my life? And we live longer now, don't we, Claire?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's completely key. You know, we outgrow some of the relationships that we've gone through our 20s, 30s, 40s with. And we can really start to wonder what's next for ourselves. And I think getting a coach, like Cindy Crawford has, getting a coach, whether she needs it or not, is a really, really important thing because we can have that support, we can have that accountability, and we feel less alone as well. Because I think one of the things that obviously we know about going through the menopause, the perimenopause and the menopause, is our hormones are also changing. So physiologically we're changing. That changes how we feel mentally and emotionally. So actually starting to talk about it, communicate and get into a community of people where we feel less alone is, I think, incredibly important.
Alan, I'm watching you here. I don't want you to feel like you're at a hen party. But do you also find that your life is different now? I know that your life is different now than it was even before the beginning of 2020. But is it about, I think when I'm listening to Claire speak, it's about being purposeful, isn't it?
Well, I think this
is
one thing I would say, because is that in the last 3 decades or so, the whole discussion about people, all of us, personhood, is that we're vulnerable, we're at risk. We need third-party interventions. Partly it's a consequence of the breakdown of networks.
Yeah.
So lots of intergenerational, you'd often have a lot of women around in the family. In my family, there weren't that many men, they died early, right? But the women were really powerful and strong, and it was a matriarchy. And they were, and there'd be people you could lean on and respond to, and also in your communities, right? People might get together, you talk through the problems and issues. It became much more of a therapeutic turn where sort of professionalised interventions happen, and the narrative become much more, we have little, not this, I'm not saying about this particular incident, but we have little agency, things happen to us, we're damaged goods often. And I think that backdrop that goes from really from the cradle to the grave often in discussions around policy and in the cultural backdrop is problematic. Now, having said that, obviously people can take whatever solutions they can, right? People can sort of say, I want to do this, and whether it's a physical activity coach or a life coach. But I am concerned that the question of the moral web and our purpose and where we're going never wants to be discussed anymore. So it used to be in the kind of religious arena, and there's less of that, then the political one. And I think we have a kind of duty, or dare I say, a moral responsibility to put forward a moral web, particularly for young people, and about what things like virtue means, what doing the right livelihood, what kind of the right purposeful life means, and questions, enlightenment questions, really.
So when people come to you, Renee, when women come to you, particularly suffering with menopause, it's the same sort of age gap predominantly.
It is.
And what do they complain about? And complain isn't the right word. What are they presenting with? And how would, let's say, traditional medical treatment differ from having the support of a life coach?
Yeah, so I think all of these things are valid, and I think that it depends on age. So when I'm seeing someone who's 54 and having night sweats and periods of stops, we know exactly what it is. But when you see someone who's 40, who comes in and they're just suddenly feeling really low in mood, they're not having the same relationship with their partner, they don't feel as warm about it, they don't feel like sex anymore, a lot of doctors would dismiss that as depression and treat it, and it doesn't really work. And actually, I think one of the first signs of menopause is mood. The mood changing as hormones slowly drop off, even if periods are still all normal. I think that's really important. So for me, I think it's about really listening and watching the woman and finding out what it might be. You know, what's in the background? How long has this been going on for? If it's someone who's had depression since they were 20, then maybe that's not the answer.
Yeah.
But I think it's about having someone who can listen. And obviously doctors don't get a lot of time to listen now. But I do think it's important. I make double appointments for all of my women where it might be menopause, so that we've got time to really discuss it. But I think Alan makes a really valid point that with the breakdown of networks, there's something else that's happened as well. We actually now are in a society where we do talk about our feelings and we do talk about things like relationships.
I mean, for
and
Cindy
what's going
Crawford
on.
to come out and admit that she's got a life coach.
But if your life network is much smaller than it would have been, and that's been exacerbated by the last 2.5 years, then who do you talk to? Who is it that you go to? And so I think for some people, a life coach, of course, it's a great idea if they can afford it. But many people can't. So, you know, go to your GP, speak to them. And if you have friends around you, speak to them. My best friend who's 60 has recently had that very same conversation with me. What am I doing? I need something else.
Scarlett, let me bring you in, because obviously I don't know when your cancer diagnosis was. Was it?
Oh, my cancer diagnosis was this year. It had nothing to do with the menopause.
Because I was going to say, but when you're listening to the worried well, when you were genuinely facing risk to your health, do you get a little impatient?
No, because so as you said, I went through the menopause before it was fashionable, and I didn't realise that. I mean, I had 6 weeks of what I now realise was absolutely severe depression. A friend of mine said it's like having your own private black cloud going over, and I didn't know what to do. But going back to networks, one of the things that happened around that time, because I had a breakup of a relationship, I had one child in university, the other in school, and I was trying to sort out. Was that a bunch of neighbourhood women who'd set themselves up just as we went to dinners once a month, and it was to help somebody whose husband had gone off, and it was to just do things. And it was incredible because all of us had children of that age. We were about the same age. And we would just laugh. We would laugh. None of us had perfect
This is what nobody
children.
tells you, that when you've got toddlers and babies, you have all your baby groups, and then they're teenagers, and you're on your own, aren't you, at 2 o'clock in the morning, checking your phone to see if your kids have come home. I need to get some of your views.
We still meet.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah. That's what Alan was saying. We need all of that. Don't we need to support each other? I guess the message, Claire, from you would be, don't be afraid to go and seek help and to say specifically, I'm normally all right, it's just this time in my life I'm finding really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's still a lot of guilt and shame because we've built up this whole identity around ourselves, and actually
being
we're now
successful and we're winning.
Exactly.
And look, our
now,
kids are older and
now you're thinking, oh, I'm not happy. I feel guilt and shame around that. But I would say also making sure that the lifestyle factors are dialed in as well, because I'm a physical coach as well.
Yes.
So on the health side of things, we need to make sure that those are dialed in, because how we look after our body is how we look after our mind, and taking responsibility for ourselves is really important.
And exercise is a great antidepressant. It really is.
Absolutely.
Right, thank you guys. Now, Colin has got in touch to say nurses should be paid the 15%. We were talking about this just a little while ago, not just because they deserve it for what they do, and but because they've lost out in real times by up to 20% since 2008. Mark says, as echoing what we were saying, the problem started when nurse training was outsourced to the universities. And Robert says the government can't pay nurses as we have no money. Phil from Devon says that we haven't mentioned the elephant in the room. The country is overpopulated. And John quite simply says to solve the immigration issue, Sunak needs to grow a pair and tell Macron that unless he does something constructive, we leave the EHCR and the boats will be turned back forcibly if necessary. OK. Thank you. Right. Keep those coming, won't you? GBviews at gbnews.uk. Now, Boris Johnson is playing up again, isn't he? It's what he does, right? Getting the attention, even when we have a new Prime Minister. I want to ask you, so in this next section, is a former Prime Minister undermining Rishi Sunak on the world stage? Sunak was not going to go to COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, of course, but then Boris said he would, and funnily enough, Rishi did another U-turn. Yesterday, Johnson said the UK shouldn't pay climate reparations, and surprise, surprise, Rishi said the same thing just a few hours later. So, is Boris finding a new way to force the green agenda onto us, or is he just trying to stay relevant to find a way to come back to frontline politics? That is the end of our first hour. We're going to be back after this short break. We know we're chatting about this first. Sorry, guys. It's only day 2. I've got a little while I'm working out the new timings of this show. So what do you think? Is Boris just being a pest, Renee?
I think he's been more than a pest. I think he's trying to exact revenge, and I think he will continue to do that for the entire duration of this government.
Yeah.
You know, and Rishi needs to sit at night and think that he who usurps the king should never be king himself. And I think Boris will try and make sure that he is unseated. And, you know, he feels that he was badly treated. He feels that he should still be the Prime Minister. And Rishi's going to pay for that. So Rishi does need to grow a pair.
Yeah.
Because he shouldn't have gone to COP after saying he wouldn't go. He should have just said, I don't care what Boris does, let him go there and be the clown. And I'm going to focus on nurses' pay and all of the other problems that we have in this country.
What do you do with a pain at work like Boris, though, Scarlett?
I just think you have to be bigger than him. I think there is absolutely no question that Renee is absolutely right, that Boris Johnson, and actually Rishi is a particular bugbear because everybody feels that Rishi's, when he went, that he brought Boris down. I mean, actually, there were another 50 people who were resigning at the time. I mean, there were 30 ministers who resigned in 24 hours. It was incredible. But it really wouldn't matter who it was. Boris believes that he's like Churchill. Boris believes that he can come back in all sorts of guises, and eventually he will ride. You know, he will ride to the rescue. And clearly, although I do believe that he had enough to go to the country, and he would have beaten Rishi, no question about it. But actually, why doesn't he want to be Prime Minister now? Because being Prime Minister is awful. I mean, being Prime Minister is making difficult decisions that are not nice for anybody, and there's no question Boris doesn't do that. Boris is sunny uplands, everything's going to be OK, you know, you can have your cake and eat it. That is Boris.
Well, he's a journalist. He's a cut-and-paste journalist, isn't he? That is all he ever was. He wanted to cut and paste a bit of copy. He wanted an editor like Dominic Cummings to tell him what to do. When Cummings was gone, it seemed like he was slightly all at sea.
Yeah.
Yes.
Once he was gone, he didn't know who to write for anymore, and then he just wants a boozy lunch, right? And once he's filed his copy, go home and have a nap. He should just go away at the moment, shouldn't he, Alan? If he's going to back Sunak, if he genuinely wants to back the Conservative Party to win another election, which is looking highly unlikely at the moment, doesn't he just need to go into the shadows for a bit?
Well, I think we need to remember what happened and the huge wave of support initially because there was a moment, and when people talk about Brexit now, they often do it in very derogatory terms, but there was a moment where the impulse of the British public said, we want to be heard, we were instructing you to do this. It was a big debate, big discussion, and we know what the split was. And that kind of impulse of the public saying, go and do your job, this is what we... And so there was that moment, and then we saw that almost immediately, actually, Boris did U-turns when he was going to hold the line, because the lack of principle and commitment to ideas and the obsession, that almost the narcissistic self, the fear of your own career, the question of the situation. And now we've got this ridiculous scenario, but it's kind of predictable, right? Which is that there was a kind of coup that happened with Boris, and actually, if he was going to go for anything, he should have gone for all the draconian measures and the impacts on there. But that's not the reason that he went. And actually, most of the public, particularly the Conservative voting public, wouldn't necessarily got rid of him. There's been some very interesting interviews that said, actually, we know who he is. He's done more good. But actually, the people that have got rid of him have got rid of him. So we have this Caesar-like moment, right, where there's been a kind of overhaul. Now we've got the revenge of the technocrats. And we got this situation where Boris is still popular with people. But if you're going to lead, it's not just about your individual strength. You have to win over. This is also why Liz Truss went, right? She didn't even convince her peers, let alone the public. They didn't explain their policies. They didn't try and win them over. You've got to win that with the public. That's what gives you strength in leadership, not just I'm a strong leader. And that's what's missing. There's a deficit. That's why we kind of need to take back democracy, right? There's a deficit. We need to make sure that the public are front and centre of things, we're having our voices heard, because otherwise we'll get more of what we see, which is going to out-virtue you with restrictions, suffocations and impositions, with this holy grail of the net zero, which actually means more limits, more restrictions, not innovation, not ingenuity, not transformation through development, not wealth creation for all, being mindful of how we do things, right? It's always presented in a crass way. Oh, if you have development, it's going to be terrible consequences. You have not sustainable development, that's an oxymoron. You develop, but we have to have the public involved in these discussions and debates, right? The consequences of what these measures are going to mean for people. We're seriously looking at power cuts and limits. Is this what we're doing in the 21st century, or can we have robust transformation? And that's what we need. So I think that him doing a U-turn, utterly predictable, then going to COP27, and now sort of trying to outshine at the level of what he's going to do, I think it has serious ramifications. You know, COVID, the experience through that, the intent for leaders to impose, restrict, regulate, we're going to see some more of that, right? More of those impulses around the discussion of the environment and wealth creation or not. And I think we have to be very we have to elevate scepticism in the discussions when they're presented to us in that way and say, how can we do this in a way that's sensible and rational? But where's the public at the heart of this?
Yeah. Are the public at the heart of this government, Renee? No. With Hunt and Sunak? I've never felt more like I'm being led by dictators than I do at the moment.
Absolutely, and they don't have us at their heart. And I think, regardless of what the latest YouGov poll would say, I think if you went out now onto the street and asked the average person what was top of their list of priorities, it's not going to be the environment. In fact, way down the list, it's going to be feeding my family, putting a roof over my head, or keeping a roof and keeping my job. That's what people are really worried about. And they don't believe that Hunt or Sunak even know what that means.
As a Labour supporter, Scarlett, you must just be delighted by this, are you? And every time I say that to somebody from Labour, they go, oh, no, we really care about the public. We're not happy about it.
No, look, the problem is, I mean, particularly the Liz Truss very short regime, how much money did she burn through, right? I mean, how much money that we could actually use for real things? But going back to what Alan says about a green agenda not, being all about restrictions, actually, it doesn't have to be. It really doesn't. You can start looking at, we can have the technology for renewables, right? We should have been insulating. The first thing that David Cameron did in 2010 was to stop insulating houses. If we'd have been insulating, not only would it be good for the environment, people would save masses of money. I mean, that's the problem. So actually, if you do the green agenda properly, you help people. I mean, you really help people with their cost of living because they don't have to do it. And so actually, there are two ways of looking at it. One is the restrictive, the ghastly, and the other is saying, let's do this really well. Yeah. Let's have lots of offshore wind farms. Let's look at how we're doing it. And instead of doing the sort of the horribleness and it is difficult when Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt go, well, we're going to find £60 billion of cuts.
You know what,
right?
Alan? I get number blindness these days because the last couple of years, we've traded the billions. We've even talking about the trillions. Trillion was a number you never used to hear before. But numbers in the last couple of years have become so murky and so obfuscated. And I think for the public, we've got crisis after crisis after crisis. We have a cost of living crisis. We've got an eco crisis. We don't just have bad weather anymore. Everything has to be a crisis. Do you think it's developing a kind of malaise with the population that we just think, well, I might be able to write to my MP about, you know, the parking on my street, but I can't write to my MP about the crisis with the climate, and people are switching off?
Well, there's a permanent state of crisis which we should be very concerned about, that attempt to constantly have us under emergency scenarios. I do think there's a sense in which people, this is the thing about a bubble and then ordinary people, and many people in Westminster and elsewhere, and the media and everywhere, often don't interact with them, but ordinary people are genuinely concerned with things like the cost of living, some would say the cost of lockdown crisis. I think the thing is that if you look at France, for instance, 60% of its electricity and its energy was coming from nuclear. We have a situation where it would take years to build one plant, and we're like sort of vacillating about whether we even do that. If you think about the Victorians, the commitment to things like digging tunnels, building bridges, transforming things, we've lost our nerve and our commitment to it. And I think that there's lots of ways to do things. But if you look at the example you used, I mean, President Obama talked about that, but they committed a huge amount of money and they only did 3 million homes. I think that what we need to be able to do is, when I say put the public at the heart of it, right, the public are not engaged in these discussions, right, and they're not involved, and they're often just treated with contempt.
But look at the protests in London at the weekend. We've never seen so many people galvanised to go out and walk on the streets. There's sort of both, isn't there? There's a small subset, a subculture of politically activated people who want to make their voices heard.
Yeah, but I think that's the key, Bev. They want to make their voices heard, but I actually think we've reached a point now where people actually believe, with this two-party system that we've got, where both parties actually are almost identical on most things.
Absolutely.
It's like the midterms in the middle.
Well,
I do.
Those of us who believe in independence and autonomy and the rights of the individual and the free market, every time the Conservatives say something, we hold our heads in our hands. Keir Starmer doubles down on it every single time. He says, "I'd go further."
No, I mean, I really think that's unfair. I certainly think. So back in the 90s, there was a problem about where is the clear blue water.
Yeah.
I think now it's massive. I mean, you know, the whole thing about actually seriously investing in green, so that instead of green being repressive, it's a way of developing Britain. It's a way of skilling up.
Saying that.
They're not.
They are.
So they've had 12 years and they have not invested in anything to do with green, with renewables. You know, there is an enormous difference about how Labour would run something, and they do listen to people. I mean, the thing about MPs, can I say MPs of whatever colour, is they do meet people all the time. They have emails that they have to read all the time. They go and see their constituents. They really
need more.
No, they really do know what's going on.
Good, and so do our panel. So do our public and our panel. And hopefully you're finding out a little bit more of what's going on. Watching Bev Turner today on GB News. We've got to the end of our first hour. We're going to be back for another hour after this short break, including how badly did the pandemic damage children's development? One report says the number of 5- and 6-year-olds who need speech and language support in schools has increased by 10%. I think that's a little bit conservative from what I've heard from nursery school teachers. That is all coming up next. Don't go anywhere.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me. on Faro.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland, Wales,
And Northern Ireland.
On TV,
On radio,
And online,
we're proud to be
the People's Channel.
Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining me. This is Bev Turner today on GB News, only my second show. Stay with us until midday for an hour of unreserved, honest discussion with my fabulous panel of guests. Renee Hoondekamp is still with me, as is Alan Miller. And this hour, we have swapped Scarlett for Nana Akwe, who you all know very well. And Nana, your dress looks fabulous with the graphics in the background. Right, we are here until midday, and we're going to be talking now about lockdown damage to our children, how the class of 2020 are struggling to communicate. And as Gavin Williamson is accused of bullying, how common is bullying at work? How often do people get away with this? I really want to hear your stories about being bullied at work. And it's back, the glorious self-indulgent series that is The Crown, that makes you either never want to leave the sofa or complain to Netflix, because with the recent death of Her Majesty the Queen, is it a bit too raw to be released now, and will you all be watching? That's all coming up after a look at the latest news.
Good morning, it's 2 minutes past 11. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Prime Minister's considering raising state pensions and benefits in line with inflation. Rishi Sunak and the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt are also considering imposing up to £60 billion in tax rises and spending cuts in the autumn budget next week. Mr Sunak will meet with his cabinet today to try to find departmental savings. The Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth, says the Conservatives are finally following their manifesto commitments.
We're calling on the government to honour the promise that they made. It's a manifesto commitment for the Conservative Party, but it's a promise that Rishi Sunak made less than 6 months ago. And indeed, my opposite number, Mel Stride, who's now the Work and Pensions Secretary, just over a month ago he was saying we should inflation-proof both universal credit and the basic state pension. So we're just holding them to their promise.
Sir Gavin Williamson reportedly told a senior civil servant to slit your throat while he was Defence Secretary. The Guardian is reporting that Sir Gavin made the remarks in front of colleagues in a meeting and on another occasion told them to jump out of the window. Scrutiny is mounting on the Prime Minister's decision to reinstate Mr Williamson into the Cabinet after it became clear that Rishi Sunak was aware of additional bullying allegations. Sir Gavin denies the new claims. Boris Johnson has asked the MPs he'd nominated for peerages to delay taking them so they don't trigger by-elections in their constituencies. Nadine Dorris and Alok Sharma are amongst those that The Times are reporting to have been given the honours. The Conservatives are currently behind the Labour Party in most official opinion polls. Millions of Americans are heading to the polls today to vote in the midterm elections. Currently, the Democrats control both chambers of the Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. If the Republicans take either, it will limit President Joe Biden's ability to pass any laws. Well, President Biden has said that a Republican victory could weaken the country's democratic institutions.
Today, we face an inflection point, one of those moments that comes around every 3 or 4 generations. We know in our bones that our democracy is at risk, and we know that this is your moment to defend it, preserve it, protect it, choose it. The power's in your hands. You're one of the reasons why I've never been more optimistic about America's future. Look, America's reasserting ourselves, leading the world in the 21st century. As I've traveled this country and the world, I see great nation because I know we're a good people.
Well, the former US President Donald Trump has given his biggest hint yet that he'll be running for the White House again.
To take back the House, we're going to take back the Senate, and we're going to take back America. And in 2024, most importantly, we are going to take back our magnificent White House. I'm going to be making a very big announcement on Tuesday, November 15th at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida.
The Head Teachers Union has warned more than half of England's schools are planning catastrophic staff redundancies. The National Association of Head Teachers says it's due to government underfunding and rising costs. A survey of over 11,000 school leaders in England found 2/3 of head teachers will have to make teaching assistants redundant or reduce their hours. Half of respondents also say they're looking at reducing the number of teachers or teaching hours. Millions of people on low incomes will receive payments of £324 from today as a part of the government's cost of living support. There's no need to apply for the scheme. Those eligible will automatically receive it. Well, the government's additional support package also includes a £400 discount on energy bills paid in monthly instalments between now and March. Social housing residents could see their heating bills cut by 42% if their homes were better insulated. The National Housing Federation says a family in social housing spends around £1,300 a year on heating. That could go down to £776 a year if their home was drought-proofed. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, back to Beverly.
Good morning, it's 11:06. This is Bev Turner on GB News. Lots to talk about this morning. Just a reminder of my panel. Firstly, welcome to Nana Akua, who is very busy in this building and she's fitted in time to join us for this second hour. We've also got Dr. René Hoendekamp with us, NHS GP and broadcaster, and of course, Alan Miller, co-founder of the Together Association. And as always, I want to hear from you. Get in touch as usual on gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'll be reading your messages as much as I can throughout the show. Now, yesterday we talked about the impact of life in lockdown and how the consequences are only really being fully felt. Now, more evidence of how lockdowns affected children. The Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists says that it's struggling to cope with demand from parents who find that their kids need speech and language support. The number of 5- and 6-year-olds who are struggling to communicate at school has risen by 10% in England alone over the past year. This is year one, so the children who started their reception years at school during lockdown. There are far more children who need help with their speech now. Renee, this doesn't really surprise any of us, does it? Now, I'm really torn on this because it was always going to happen if you took children out of their social learning environments of receptions and nurseries. And it was always going to happen when parents were trying to work from home. But what effectively has happened is that parents have stuck their kids in front of a screen while they tried to get on with working from home. This is a big part of it, understandably.
Yes. And do you know what? This makes my blood boil and my heart break simultaneously. This was absolutely predictable. And I was staggered this morning to read a quote from the Chief Executive of the Royal College of Speech and Language, who said it was shocking and nobody would have thought it would have been this significant. Really? Well, as a parent and as a doctor, I could have told you this instantly, and that's why we screamed, don't do it. Children learn by watching people, by watching lips, by seeing faces. So not only did we lock them at home in front of a screen, we put masks on people around them at the same time, and we expected that to make no difference. And I think these decisions were made because there's this view in government that children are resilient and they'll always be okay, they'll always bounce back. And that too makes no sense to me, because if that were true, we wouldn't have adults with trauma that started in childhood. So anyone with half a brain, just half, maybe a quarter, could have seen that this was going to happen. And we have destroyed kids all the way through for decades. When I saw babies at 8 weeks and did a baby check, they wouldn't smile unless I took my mask off.
Yeah.
And that's a clear sign. Babies learn by watching faces.
Nana, is it purely the parents' responsibility, though? When they've sat these children in front of tech, I mean, look, we all do it. Don't get me wrong. You know, my kids spend way too much time on screens. It's really difficult. But they're older. Or is it that the state should have thought about this when we were locking them down?
Well, to be honest, OK, so if I go back to the lockdown, we thought we were doing the right thing, right? We did it because we thought we were doing the right thing. And on some levels we did the right thing, on others we didn't. And my son, Ivory, he's actually 5. So I went through the whole thing with him being there. And because I work in journalism, I could have actually taken him to school.
You were a key worker, yeah.
Well, I tried. And they said, no, we haven't got enough teachers. So, unfortunately, he can't come into school. So even though I was a key worker, I still couldn't get him in school. So their plan didn't quite work as it was meant to. And I have noticed that before he was so sharp, he was so astute, he used to watch, not Top Gear, but the other one. What's the other one?
Car programme?
Yeah, car programme.
Fifth Gear?
No, the one.
Oh, the one that Jeremy Clarkson then went on to do.
And he goes, Jeremy Clarkson, James Hammond. He used to, one time he was sitting in the bath and we heard him swear. We said, where's that from? And he's been watching too much of that car show. But his learning went backwards as well. So even now, his concentration, he was so sharp. He's still clever because I work on him,
But can you see why? And the kids, do you see the kids in his class as well? Like, you know, if you're mixing with those other parents and those children, are people being honest about it? Because that's very, very honest of you to admit that you've seen it in your own child. But do you think the parents are a little bit ashamed to admit this?
Well, I mean, I don't know whether they're ashamed about it, but I think
they're not aware, maybe.
I think all of us as parents have seen the sort of backward step that the children have taken. So you really have to work. I've been working so hard on my son to get him to go back to the mode of concentration that he was in before, because he would focus on something. He wouldn't let go until he got what he wanted, a little bit like me. And then now he's a bit lackadaisical about stuff, and I find it difficult to get him.
Don't forget, this is also affecting, you know, the poorest children worse than the ones who are going to good schools, private schools and good state schools where they had good teaching and they were able to engage with that, and parents maybe had more time. The poorer kids, once again, are being even more disadvantaged by these rules. And I don't blame parents, I really don't. I have seen really, really dedicated parents who were trying to run their business downstairs. Their teenagers were on their Zoom meetings who got anorexia for a little bit of control during the whole pandemic. I don't blame parents at all. I blame the policy and I blame the way that we just thought that the kids would be OK.
How did that happen, Alan? How did they think that they just would be OK? Is it just that we've got blokes in positions of power making decisions who never spend any time with their children?
Well, you know, I don't think it's that.
I genuinely think there's part of it. Like I'm sure that if it was a cabinet maybe full of mums, they'd have been shouting, hang on, we're going to pay the price for this in 2 years.
I think you're right.
Well, you know, I think quite a lot of women and men championed lockdowns. I think the thing is, because they were presented with an idea it would keep everyone safe, which was not the case. And actually, had Boris Johnson had stuck with his gut instincts and the pandemic strategy, even more importantly, the actual pandemic strategy that's to deal with pandemics, that is historically developed and is there in place, that was then jettisoned to implement something that had only been done briefly in Mexico and in China. Never tested before, no evidence, no foundation for it. And so when they did that...
Which was fundamentally, just point out the difference, because people may not know what that pandemic preparedness plan was. That was about you always quarantine the unwell and you let the healthy go about their business. That's where we flipped that.
Yes,
but we didn't know what it was, though. Let's be honest.
You never know what it was with the pandemic.
No, but let's be honest. Let's go back, though. It's easy to talk about it afterwards. OK, yeah, this happens, that happens. We're talking about it afterwards. Before, we didn't know, first of all, that it was probably an airborne virus.
As a doctor, within 3 weeks, we saw enough data from Italy to know who was at risk. We really did. We knew it was men, we knew it was the obese, and we knew it was people with comorbidities.
Well, so did you know also about things like the COVID gene? I mean, there is a COVID gene, so
there will be.
But there were lots of things. There were lots of things. Look, I'm not saying that they did the right thing in locking down for so long. I think that they didn't think about the sort of ricochet of the effect of what they were doing. But I'm just listening, thinking, well, they were trying to do the right thing.
Right,
so let's be fair.
So being fair, you'd have a proper risk assessment and you'd evaluate the situation. You'd work out the criteria. You'd look at what had happened in China. Anyone who was looking at that was looking at actual numbers. You could say, well, the numbers in China, you can't trust them. OK, so then you start looking at what's happened in Italy and elsewhere. Sweden took a different approach. With schools and everything, actually, still had groups of 50 together. When a kid at school got COVID, they didn't shut the class down or send the whole school home, they sent the individual down. We knew from, even with the Diamond ship, that was like a petri dish.
It was.
You could see. We knew that the demographics, we knew what they were initially. Now, the Great Barrington Declaration actually made the point.
When did we know that?
The Great Barrington, quite early on. And I think the thing is that then we had 3 lockdowns. We had 3 sets of restrictions. We had 3 lots of impositions, and we had a situation. So, but also, I want to be careful not to catastrophise forever the children's situation.
Yeah.
It's not just to say cavalierly, oh, they're really resilient. It was a serious imposition, and it was very problematic. Luckily, people campaigned against it. Particularly people like Us For Them, with the masks in the schools and to keep them open, and they were successful. And some politicians did here together, and others all campaigned. I think the thing is that we have to have a reckoning and recognise it. The COVID inquiry isn't doing a good enough job. The terms of reference were problematic. Taking responsibility now, even to your point, if you want to now take responsibility and assess and evaluate what was known at the time and who was saying what, and we can look back at who was saying what, we're clear about it. But the COVID inquiry should look at that, because the thing is that I am confident that with the right interventions, many of the kids can come through. There is the issue of many in the lower social-economic bracket that are always going to be at most risk, and they were detrimentally. And this is not just in our country, by the way. Globally, if we look at what's happened, particularly in developing nations, the impact of these measures have been really catastrophic. So when we weigh up everyone could die, or actually only a few people could die, or is it granny, or and then we assess the damage now across the board for children, education, but also in all the other areas in terms of the economy, the cost of living, lockdown crisis, the ongoing impacts in a number of areas. I think we have to have a proper reckoning so that we don't get into another situation where they say, oh, we have to do this, there's no option, it's unprecedented.
Let me ask Nana then, as somebody, Nana, who, you were very much on the side of with the government are doing the right thing and we are following the correct protocol. Yeah. And I think you genuinely believed that, didn't you?
Well, that sounds a little bit patronising.
It does sound really patronising.
It is very patronising.
It is, but it does.
No,
it's not.
No, it is.
But it
is.
But it's not meant to be patronising, because there's a lot of people who genuinely did believe it. So we didn't. No, not that you were stupid. No, but I'm saying that if you were only listening to the BBC...
I wasn't only listening to the BBC.
I'm sure you were, but
I did work at the time.
I mean, I think you and I were on some daytime shows where we were probably debating this. We can still say hello in the corridor here, and we can still hug each other hello, and we've not fallen out over it. And I don't want to do that now. But what I'm saying is, for people like you who were very much in the public eye, encouraging lockdowns. Yep. Do you now, that you've had this humility...
Okay, hold on.
No, hang on.
I didn't encourage... Hang on.
No,
because you just thought it was wrong.
Listen, it's my show.
No.
Listen, if you are... Let me finish my point.
I wasn't encouraging lockdowns, though. No. I was supporting the vaccine, but I was not encouraging lockdown. And by the 3rd lockdown, I was thinking, look, this is a little bit too much, and actually we shouldn't be doing this.
And to be fair,
too far.
By the 3rd lockdown?
By the 3rd one, I was saying, look, come on, we're learning now. We need to start opening things up.
And to be fair,
I encouraged the vaccine. I didn't encourage a lockdown.
I thought that 3-week lockdown at the start was the right thing to do.
So did I. I agree. But the second one, no. By the end of the first one, it wasn't. But my point is now, do you think that people like you, and I don't mean that to sound patronising, people who had your opinions, are they now in a position to agree with Alan and say, we do need a full inquiry, we don't want this to happen again, we do need to know what went wrong, we need to know the motivations?
But you're assuming that people like me don't think we need a full inquiry. OK, so first of all...
I'm asking you, that's the point. I'm not assuming that, I'm asking you.
But the question that you put to me is sort of an assumptive position, so I'm just clarifying that if I look at the lockdown situation, I would say that you need an inquiry to look at the whole thing anyway, irrespective of where you sat on with regard to the opinion. So that would be without saying. With regard to lockdown, I think it went on way too long. I mean, I was sick and tired of it by the end. And even with the vaccination, at the beginning I was 100% with it. But once Omicron came along, I thought, well, this is a natural vaccine now. Yeah. So to be pushing a vaccine that does exactly what this virus has now become, I felt was a bit too far, especially for those who are healthy and fit. So in that respect. With regard to lockdown, unfortunately, it wasn't thought through fully. We saw the first one. The second one, I thought maybe half of it was necessary, But by the third one, I just thought, come on.
Do you think we jettisoned our kids without enough thought?
I think we thought that we were doing the right thing, so we looked at our children and thought, we don't want kiddies to pass on illness. Look, I have an autoimmune condition, so I was the first to say, listen, if you got that virus, you're not coming into my house, because I'm a single mum, I've got to look after my children. And I'll be the first one to say...
I thought you meant to your son.
No, Ma, I've got two of them. I've got to my son. Well, get away from me. You've been in... No. But I'm the first one to admit that, yeah, I agreed with it, and I do agree with the first parts of it, but towards the end... When the virus changed, it was mutating, it was getting milder. One part of it, Omicron, was actually a natural vaccine. At that point, even I said, no, you shouldn't. If you're healthy, you shouldn't be.
The other thing we have to look at is the role that adults gave to children. I mean, one of the things I was very concerned about is what I think was and I've just come out in support of the right for Labour to withdraw their services at times in context of the nurses, but the role that some of the teachers' unions took in the school, threatening the government, pretty much precipitating a lockdown as well. Now, that's not to say that the government should not have held the line if it believed a certain thing, but withdrawing its services, that pressure, the shriek, the noise, the how dare you go outside, look at that person going to the park. Let's remember that climate.
Oh, yeah, we remember that.
And I think the thing is that adults that didn't give a lead or that led in a way to stoke panic and fear. I'm not talking about ordinary citizens making decisions trying to work it out. I'm talking about the behavioural insights team with the government that pushed a narrative of fear. I'm talking about leaders in teaching and education that should have given a lead to young people and children. And I think that we created a climate of fear and also a climate not just of lockdowns, of nudges, restrictions, impulses that when in doubt, regulate, suffocate. And I think that, not necessarily just lockdowns, but that is something that is kind of a little bit in the heartbeat of politicians who would have technocratic solutions, and we should avoid it. We need a full reckoning, we need to be honest, and we need to make sure, I think, that we never do something like that again.
Yeah. Absolutely. OK, good place to take a break. Now, after the break, Nicola Sturgeon has caved in over lowering the age for children to change gender in Scotland. How damaging will this be? We'll be discussing it after the break.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It stays breezy today and there will be further lines of showers rattling through. Some of these are going to be heavy with some thunder, but some drier interludes in between. Low pressure still in charge. Now that sent through a very active front last night. You might have been woken up if you're in the southwest or in Wales. There was some very noisy rain, some very strong winds associated with that, and the weather stays lively during the rest of the day. You can see how the bands of rain or showers are pushing in from the west and southwest, and it's always Wales and the southwest that will get the heaviest and most frequent downpours, but there'll be showers virtually everywhere, and some of these will be heavy with some rumbles of thunder. In between, a few sunny spells, but it stays blustery. 50-mile-per-hour winds near coast, 40 inland, and temperatures of 15 or 16 in the south, 11 to 13 further north. Now, through the evening, those showers just keep going. They'll come through at quite a pace during the hours of darkness. I think some clear spells in the east, but really around southern and southwestern shores in particular, those showers will just not stop through the night. On and off, but still with a gusty breeze accompanying them. That will keep things mild in the south. I think in the north of Scotland, that's the coldest spot overnight, 2 to 5 Celsius in some sheltered spots. Now, we start off with some brightness on Wednesday, some sunshine. There will still be some showers coming through, especially in the west and increasingly around the north of England, Irish sea coast. But actually, there'll be fewer showers for many compared with today, and some sunshine coming through. So 14 or 15 Celsius, less breezy, feeling a bit more pleasant with those gaps in between the weather. Now, into the evening on Wednesday, the showers will turn to persistent rain across western Scotland and perhaps Northern Ireland as well, some drizzly stuff here. A lot of cloud thickening towards the west and especially the northwest. That's a sign of a change for the second half of the week. It's going to be unsettled in the northwest, drier in the southeast and warmer for all.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
She has a vagina.
Good morning, it's 11:26. You are watching Bev Turner today on GB News. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, we've had this debate before, and I'm no doubt we'll have it again. How old do you have to be before you can legally change gender? Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, wanted to lower the age to 16, but she's faced a rebellion from her backbenchers. Now, Scots aged 16 and 17 will have to wait longer to legally change gender, although critics argue that the concession does not go far enough. Renee Hoendekamp, where do you stand on this? Do you see people ever come into your surgery to say that they're struggling with their gender?
Yes, we do, and we have patients who have transitioned, and of course I'm absolutely will support anyone to live the life that they want to live. But I do think we have to think about the ideology that's out there at the moment, which seems to be being pushed by Mermaids, Stonewall, into our schools at a younger and younger age, and I think we're just confusing kids when they're exploring naturally, as we all did, as we went into puberty, our sexuality. So I think we should leave these things alone until people have gone through those periods and maybe got more clarity for themselves. Now, notwithstanding that, of course, give them some mental health support, let them talk about what they're experiencing and guide them to where they need to be. But that doesn't mean affirmative action. And I think the Cass report clearly says that if you let children even just live in the gender that they identify with, that is not a benign thing, and it potentially has damaging long-term effects.
Nana, where do you think this trend came from? Because we talk about this so often, but I kind of struggle to think when it first arrived on our kind of social radar.
Do you know, when I try and think back to why it's become such a big thing, I think it's potentially manifested itself in the whole gender pronoun thing, which has expanded. And suddenly we're in this weird space where there's about 100 different gender pronouns and numbers are growing. I don't know. I think it sort of roots itself in the stereotype. And so if you don't think, oh, I don't do womanly things, so therefore I'm more like a man. We've created these stereotypes of what a man and a woman is. And if you do not subscribe to one of those and you fit nearer the other side, then you might start to think, maybe I'm more of a man than a woman. And when I was young, I mean, I shouldn't really embellish this story, but I have an older brother, and I used to try and stand when I was going to the toilet because I wanted to be a boy. I know that sounds a bit, but it didn't work, obviously. But I wanted to be a boy. And I was a tomboy. They used to put me in goal. I was in goal. They kicked the ball at me. I catch the ball.
But you've just said it.
I wanted
You're a
to
tomboy,
be.
and that was always what.
And that was the thing. Alan, what do you think? Because it still seemed to have. We did quite well, I think, to get rid of stereotypes. Women could go to work and they don't stay at home, and suddenly, like Nana said, there's somehow this reaction against what children maybe still have these stereotypes in their minds. I don't know.
Well, I think that what's happened is that the obsession with identity that's part of a kind of a contemporary backdrop in universities and elsewhere has obsessed around these things that are actually, in many ways, very categorically racist and misogynistic, ironically, right? And then they get what everyone says they're all into equality and everything, but actually the only person you can actually supposedly say that you're allowed to say is a woman is someone who's trans woman today in some quarters, and you get cancelled. I think the question is this. It's a really interesting question. Now, and this is the point about the public getting involved in the debate, in the last year or so only, this has been brought to the attention of the public. Before that, you had organisations getting into the civil service and other institutions circumventing the public. The public wasn't involved in this conversation because when you bring this kind of discussion to the public, they're like, what are you talking about? And I think that that's what's been really good in the last year, that you've had the honesty, which is what obviously lots of people were nervous about it from politicians and others, the honesty of the demos, the public saying, this is ridiculous, no way. Just to say, I'm really pleased that the SNP has done this and forced her hand and back on this, but the idea you can't go out and drink or vote till 18, but somehow you do this. And I just think that when you're talking about this is actually, we should call it what it is, this is actually really child abuse. Yeah. Let autonomous adults make decisions they feel they need to. But I think that the, adolescence, we go for, I'm not going to start making confessions about my own adolescence, but we've done all sorts of things, right? Yeah. But then to have adults encouraging the idea that you should do something, that's not naturally that's coming from you, what you're working things out. And I think it's really problematic. And this is why it's really important that we have the public engaged in these discussions.
And you know what? Sometimes the parents of these kids are, for some reason, enjoying this attention, this journey, this fashion. I don't know what it is, but I think it's a good news story that she's had to go back on this a little bit.
Biggest rebellion that she's seen.
Good.
Yeah, well, let's see. Right, we've got to move on, guys, I'm afraid. We only had a couple of minutes on that now. After the break, Gavin Williamson is accused by former colleagues of bullying and abusive texts. Have you ever been bullied in the workplace? If so, how did you deal with it? Get in touch, let us know. gbviews@gbnews.uk. That's all after your morning's news.
Good morning, 11:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Prime Minister's considering raising state pensions and benefits in line with inflation. Rishi Sunak and the Chancellor are also considering imposing up to £60 billion of tax rises and spending cuts in the autumn budget next week. Mr Sunak will meet with his cabinet today to find departmental savings. Sir Gavin Williamson reportedly told a senior civil servant to slit your throat while he was Defence Secretary. The Guardian's reporting that Sir Gavin made the remarks in front of colleagues in a meeting and on another occasion told them to jump out of the window. Sir Gavin denies the new claims. Boris Johnson has asked the MPs he's nominated for peerages to delay taking them so they don't trigger by-elections in their constituencies. Nadine Dorries and Alok Sharma are amongst those that the Times are reporting to have been given the honours. The Conservatives are currently behind the Labour Party in most official opinion polls. Millions of Americans are voting today in the midterm elections. Currently, the Democrats control both chambers of the Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Well, if the Republicans take either, it will limit President Joe Biden's ability to pass any laws. The head teachers' unions warned that more than half of England's schools are planning catastrophic staff redundancies. The National Association of Head Teachers says it's due to government underfunding and rising costs. A survey of over 11,000 school leaders in England found 2/3 of head teachers will have to make teaching assistants redundant or reduce their hours. We're on your TV, online and your DAB Plus radio. You're up to date on GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1452 and €1.1452. The price of gold is £1,459 and 70 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,228 points.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning, it is 11:36. You're watching Bev Turner Today on GB News with my fantastic panel. Now, Gavin Williamson, the former Chief Whip and now Minister without portfolio in the government, is facing bullying allegations. According to The Guardian, he allegedly told one senior civil servant to slit their throats and jump out of a window, which is probably going too far in anyone's definition. This follows a previous story that he sent abusive text to then Government Chief Whip Wendy Morton. So where is the line between being demanding and being bullying? Alan Miller, you've worked in hospitality in your life, right? You've been the boss of people, yeah? Yeah? You're a big presence, you're an assertive man. And so how do you get the line right? Because sometimes you just want to open a can of something on,
Well, I think the thing is that it's part of our cultural backdrop, right, which is the collapse of authority. So when you don't have authority, you end up doing really stupid, overreactive things. And I think that's true of government, and I think that's true of individuals. There's abhorrent things. If that is what that was said, that is outrageous, right?
Absolutely.
I think there's also a problem that any attempt to push people or encourage them or inspire them or make them go further, or actually just say, show up on time, do your work, that's what you're meant to be doing, by the way. There's also that thing, oh, you're bullying me. No, there needs to be a commitment to this. There needs to be a sense of duty, the things we talked about before. People take themselves seriously. In fact, you never get a brilliant sports person or business person who firstly hasn't had to push themselves, but hasn't had others pushing them, saying, can you go further? What's the best? Now, obviously, some people are not very good at it and do it in a crass way, and some people are really good at it and inspire you. And we've all had that. And, I've had experiences really kind of at school where people physically did things and all that. But it's, I ended up thinking to myself, right, I've just got to get better. I've got to handle it. You have strategies to deal with it. In the workplace now, I'm concerned that this conversation about microaggressions comes up, right? Anything, you're wearing a night, that looks nice, you look... Then all of a sudden, that's you're being really sexist, it's really bullying, or if you say something, everyone's trying to kind of codify what they say and do. So on the one hand, there is obviously things that are problematic. We all know what it looks like, right?
Yeah.
Threatening you, saying if you don't just... Now, whipping people is slightly... whipping, if you're going to be a whip...
You're talking about politics, not literally whipping people.
Exactly.
Just to be clear, especially if you're listening on the radio, it's like, what's he got in the studio?
Yeah,
you mean...
the boring world that I live in.
Yeah.
I'm talking about... Yeah, so he was the whip, right? The chief whip. You're going to need to have a certain amount of pushing people and saying, do this. But the thing about discipline, right, is it's a two-way street. When you're disciplined and you have authority, you don't need to be saying silly things. You don't need to, because by the way everyone's conducting themselves, you say, this is what... And you've convinced people. This is the problem with all of this, right? If you don't convince people with the merit of your argument, if they don't feel like there's a kind of commitment to that based on you having won that idea, then you're ushering there, and then you're going to start, this clandestine stuff is really, is ugly. But I also want to say that, I think that we shouldn't just assume that our fellow workmates and citizens, that you can't push them, you can't inspire them to go beyond. And I think we've got to have a kind of honest discussion about that.
Is there a generation issue here, Nana? Because when you're talking about this, I was thinking, is it just it's like the millennials who can't take it? And they've got a language for it, right? When what we would have just said was, oh, she gave me a bit of a telling off in the back room. Whatever. Now it's labelled, isn't it? It's bullying.
Yeah, I think we do have an issue with the wallflower generation who can't sort of take anything, but I think that's partly our own fault. There was a time when, A, they took religious education out of the curriculum, which would have given people a load of guidelines, and B, there was also the time when even it was OK to come second, and it doesn't matter, don't think about winning, don't worry about it. You mustn't, smack your children. Not that I advocate smacking, but, a little pat on the hand, I think is fair, but they would say that's not wrong, and there's become a sort of...
So we try to overprotect and we shield them from any sort of
and then they
discomfort.
don't understand the difference. However, what Gavin Williamson did there in that text is clearly out of order. Yeah. But then there is the other side of it, that sort of hidden, covert bullying that I'm glad we've now highlighted. Yeah. Because that is this covert behaviour, a passive aggression, the microaggressions, which do exist, and usually we only recognised physical aggression and a physical aggressive stance and voice as bullying. But now we've started to understand how people can micromanage and microbully.
The NHS, Renee, has been beset with accusations of bullying culture for years. Have you seen it?
So I saw it when I was a junior doctor, and I got bullied by a female consultant terribly.
What does that look like? What do you mean?
It was awful. I mean, I would be on ward rounds, and she would be just getting at me and getting... At one point, she actually said to me, "Where's your Latin?" And this had been going on for weeks and weeks, and I actually flipped. And
Where's your Latin?
Where's my Latin?
You mean in terms of understanding medication, you didn't understand the etymology of certain words?
It was speaking to me about words in an ECG. And I flipped. And because I've never been a wallflower, and I also spent 20 years in a private business working for Richard Desmond, where, bullying was, not even a term that was used in a very aggressive environment. Yeah. I actually flipped and I went bonkers in front of the entire ward round, and I said, you know what, when you go to a comp in the East End of London, you don't play rugby and you don't learn Latin. Now, do you want to ask it to me in the right way? And I'll answer the question. Yeah, and actually, that stopped it completely. But a lot of people are not me, and they haven't come from my background.
But it's the power structure in the workplace, isn't it? She could so easily have said, you are my subordinate, you will not talk to me like that, and then got you in trouble.
Yes. Absolutely, that could have happened.
What do you do, Alan, if you're an employee? What would your advice be if you are an employee and you are getting these microaggressions? I'm not sure I buy the idea of I think the microaggression is a very strange thing to quantify because it's always somebody's opinion, right?
Well, not necessarily, especially as a woman of colour. Yeah. I've had to tolerate a lot of it, and some people won't see it or deliberately don't see it.
And what does it look like? What does a microaggression look like?
Well, the problem is, to the other person, it looks like nothing. To you, who it has been done to, you see it. But often those people around you might...
But what is it? Is it not me saying to you, you look nice today, and you saying, oh, do I not normally look nice?
No, but that's not really a microaggression, is it? You know when someone is pushing something towards you that is not really particularly friendly.
But what is that? Is it body language? Is it words?
Well, there's lots of it. There's body language, it's tone of voice. There's a lot of things in there where you can detect one. But I think what's happened is that because we've mollycoddled people, they're unable to differentiate the two. So you can say something and somebody realise, or they know the the rules now. They all know the rules. You've said that this way. Oh, I could get that person in trouble. I don't really like that. The bullying can be the other way round, you know. So
I think we're getting into a very dangerous, partly territory where we say all words are violence, and that we also differentiate between certain things. Now, when I had one of my first jobs in what you could call it hospitality, it was a really posh American-style sandwich bar in the city, right? And I used to get there at 5 in the morning, and we had a 15-minute break, and we'd finish by about 3 in the afternoon. But George downstairs, the chef, he would give me a clump. He'd get out of my way, what you do. It would be that. And I was like...
That's not a microaggression. That's a macroaggression.
That's the thing, like, I'm running it down here, and if you get in my way and you're not fast enough, that's... Now, I'm not advocating that.
No.
All I'm saying is, he kept me on my feet going. And also, you don't annoy George, right? Now, there were a range of managerial strategies. I'm being crass about that, but I just... The point is that it's like inspiring a team. It's always best if you can do it in a way that's uplifting and you encourage. But there has to be discipline, right? And I do get concerned with the idea that, like this term that came from America, look, everyone knows it when they get it, right? When you're getting... You know when someone doesn't like you for lots of reasons, but... You've got to be able to define that. Now, when you say there's a term like elevator eyes, because you look at someone, which has come from the campus and then starts being used by corporate management.
You heard of elevator eyes?
No, well, it's like when you look up, and then, so you look at someone, basically.
Okay.
So there's all these things that are now being codified in the workplace and other areas about conduct, which is really about management, then having another layer of impositions. It isn't about productive creativity. It isn't actually about... It actually separates people in the workplace more, rather than a positive way of encouraging it. Those old style, and actually you've still got some, those bullies, right, they just get a kick out of it. You're always going to get an element of that. But I would encourage people to... this is a bit, it's old-fashioned, but I agree with you that we haven't done enough of this for children, right, and young people. Encourage them to develop their internal resources and support one another, and to be able to be courageous and go through, because actually those experiences can help forge you and give you really good insights. And the whole anti-bullying campaign in schools and all that has been a problem from that point of view, because you haven't learned those skills.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been getting in touch. Julia said, I was bullied by the manager at work. He made me ill in the end. He restructured jobs to get me out. It was extremely stressful. Everybody knew what he was doing, but he wouldn't speak up. But they wouldn't speak up, sorry. I used to feel sick going to work. He was aggressive at times and always behind closed doors. I wasn't his last victim, and sadly, he's now on the local council. And Debbie has said, I was seriously bullied in my last civil service job, and HR and the union started a case against the woman who did it to me. She then announced she was pregnant. I was told she was therefore untouchable, and they couldn't complain. Further, I had to leave. Yeah, I think it's probably a fairly common problem, actually, and I don't know, maybe the Gavin Williamson story will bring it to people's attention. Right, we are moving on. Now, it's got divorce, a bit of bullying as well, salacious gossip, infidelity, public recriminations, and even toe-sucking. Season 5 of The Crown drops on Netflix tomorrow with a premiere in London tonight. The latest series covers the 1990s, when the Queen's popularity was at an all-time low. Prince Charles and Diana were publicly fighting, and most people consider the monarchy irrelevant. Let's have a quick peek at what's in store.
The events of the last 12 months. Perhaps I have more to reflect on than most.
The royal family is in genuine crisis.
Have royal scandals damaged the country's reputation?
The House of Windsor should be binding the nation together, setting an example of idealized family life. It's a situation that cannot help but affect the stability of the country.
For years, I've called for a more modern monarchy that reflects the world outside.
I don't think it's my behaviour that's threatening its survival. You, as future king, have a duty.
People will never understand how it's really been for me. I never stood a chance.
Oh, well, the recent death of Her Majesty the Queen has led to those who are protective of the sanctity of the royal family to be extremely disapproving. We've also got disclaimers now, which were demanded at the start of each episode. Let me come to you then, Renee. Are you a fan of The Crown? And should we have a disclaimer at the start of these series to say, just in case you are confused, this is a fictionalised version of potentially factual events?
No, I think it's more of the nanny state. I mean, look, I love The Crown. I will watch it. I know what it is. You know, when my daughter's watching a Disney movie, they put disclaimers up at the front. We don't read them. Of course we don't read them. We're not stupid. You know, we're going to watch what we want to watch, whether there's a disclaimer or not. But I think the problem with The Crown this time comes when the people in it are alive.
I know.
That's the problem.
Well, I'm late to this party. I've only just started watching season 1. I kind of resisted it because I did have a bit of a moral problem with it. And also I feel like I want to watch fact, I want to watch a documentary, or I want to watch something completely fictional. I thought I was going to spend all my time trying to disseminate what was true and what was false, and I love it.
Absolutely.
I've really got into it. Do you like it, Nana?
I can't be bothered. I can't be bothered. I've seen, the monarchy are here in this country. I've seen what they've done and what's happening. I don't want to hear just stories that just aren't even true. And then in the end, as you said, the people are alive, which I think there should be some sort of legal... I mean, how can you make up something about somebody who's alive and then that be OK? And it's absolute rubbish. You can't do that. Surely they could be able to be sued or something.
I can't think if there's a parallel. Is there a parallel? Because it's not the first time the royal stories have been told, of course. And it does make you realise how their life is just fundamentally a soap opera. But it also, for me, Alan, I don't know whether you watched it, but it kind of humanises them as well. I'm still on series 1, but it makes me feel quite sorry for the late Queen and for Prince Philip, and in a way that I didn't imagine that I would.
It's not true.
Well, you know, often, like with Shakespeare, we see him... in our own lens, through our own lens, in our own time. People often try and project that in a different way, and I think that's what's happened with this. I mean, I've watched all of them up until this one, and I got obsessed with them. I happen to not be obsessed with the royal family. I happen to be someone that thinks that history is often in the contemporary period made by many ordinary people. But I do think that the questions of the values and duty and responsibility and many of the things that people rallied around to come with the Queen and her death, what she embodied, matters a lot to people. Now, I hate all these trigger warnings everywhere, right? I think people can make their own decisions and they can separate things. There is a thing where you think, OK, this is now a depiction that clearly is fictional and a bit fantastical, and it's talking about things that have happened in the recent period. I think that, you know, one of the things is you say, does it happen anywhere? I mean, as it happens, if we're going to have these trigger warnings, perhaps we should have them all over the news in the last 3 years. Right? Because if you're going to say, has it happened before...
Except GBNews. Yeah, Nana are queer, and I would just like to clarify, there is some veracity here.
My point being, and actually documentaries and lots of campaigning journalism and all sorts of things that are saying this is what the truth is, right? As though somehow the truth is this thing to be... Now, the truth is to be interrogated and interacted with and engaged with and discussed. And some people might argue, well, this will enable that because these kind of conversations that are happening all the time enable that to do that. I do think that also the obsession and the portrayal of Diana consistently in a certain way, she became to embody what we talked about a bit earlier, which is this kind of... the idea of the victim...
It's martyrdom, isn't it?
Well, Prince Harry's quite good at that. She's obviously...
Yeah, the idea...
It's not good.
And her... Pardon?
Prince Harry's inherited
very
that.
good at that. He's a professional one, isn't he? A professional victim.
Yeah, well, it's different if you lose your mother. I'm saying...
No, I'm not saying
nation...
that, though. No, but lots of people have been through that sort of experience, and it's not a good one. So, but for him to sort of almost have the monopoly on victimhood, how I see it, I think is unacceptable, frankly. But with regard to The Crown, I mean, would any of you, I mean, out of interest, if there was a thing about your life and it was portrayed in such an incorrect manner, would that be acceptable? I mean, what do you think? Would you?
I don't know. I mean, what do you think? I think I'd be appalled. But then any of us who've ever been in a newspaper, you open a newspaper and you go, well, that's a load of rubbish about me. But you just switch off. But an actual series, I think, would be deeply uncomfortable.
But don't forget, we're only hearing those people say it's not true. We don't know what's true and what isn't. It might all be true. We don't know. It might all be untrue. It's just somebody always wants to present themselves in their own way.
But it's all right if they do it, but if other people do it for you and then you almost have literally no control over it, I just think, is there no law about that? Surely the monarchy can stop that.
I once had a chapter in a book many years ago, I'm not even going to say where it was, and it was absolute fiction about me, and I was outraged at the time. I was young, I was in my 20s, I was outraged, and I spoke to a lawyer where I worked, and they said, you know what? The best thing you can do, that will sell 10 copies, leave it alone. The more you complain about it, the more you take action, the more people will buy it.
It was unusual.
We do have libel laws.
Well, you should have done it then, shouldn't you? You could have had...
Well, I mean, it was unusual. It was very unusual that Prince William actually came out and condemned this footage in The Crown, didn't he? He's actually made a statement to say that they don't believe that this is true. That's unprecedented.
But I'd also think that we have to be careful about allowing monarchs or rulers or anyone else to say what can and can't be done in fiction or in the news.
In drama.
Or anywhere, anything to do with that.
Well, it is
I think
drama,
we do
isn't
have
it?
libel laws, but I think one of the points is that if you're in the public arena, you make a decision, and that's, you don't if you're born into it, but you're part of it or you choose to leave. And that there's a pact that goes on, right? And the pact is that you are often to be interrogated, your life, it's not just in the, you're not in the private sphere, you're in the public sphere. The question of accuracy is an important one. As I say, we need it in the news much more as well. And so I'm not so much into the trigger things, but I think it's not great that they've done that. I think it's sloppy, it's a bit sensationalist. Does it mean it's not still lavish to watch? Yes, it's great. But actually, there is a big question about the role and responsibilities of whether you're a Republican-type nation-state or whether you're one with a monarchy and what does it mean. And they're questions now with the Queen going as well. People will ask much more and the role for them and everything. I think they're important conversations to have that people can think about.
What if somebody sees that and then they do something to themselves as a result of it? So you've made up this fictitious thing about them, and then in the end somebody takes their life or something because of the way they've been depicted in something like this.
Could you not say that about any film or any drama?
But specifically, they've done one about you or whatever, and that person has suffered.
I think we need to have responsibility. That people take... Well, I think that under English law and generally that people are responsible for their own conduct. I don't know. It's a bit like the idea that you see something and then you do that. Look, some things...
No, but if it's specifically about you...
Yeah, I get it. I get it. But I think that... I think we're quite robust, and I think that we can handle stuff. And I think that if you make a decision and you're arguing things in the public domain, you expect certain things to come your way. It's not great. It's ugly.
And if you argue that you can't do that in drama, you can't then also do that in newspapers, and you can't do that in the magazines like the one you used to work for, because somebody might take offence or somebody might be so upset by it that they take their own life. It's a very extreme risk.
Not really. I'm thinking of people like Caroline Flack. I mean, that was a terrible situation. OK, so it felt like she was vilified in a sense. And she obviously, you know, it got too much for her. So
but that was news. Yeah, that wasn't drama, was it?
But I'm saying it could be anything. So I'm saying that with these sort of things, when it comes to TV dramas and things like that, where the people are living and you're making something up that isn't true, I think there's a huge responsibility. And I don't think Netflix should be able to get away with it.
Well, we'll see. I mean, look, it's a massive series. It's making Netflix an absolute fortune. And maybe this disclaimer is more for the American audience who perhaps don't have these sorts of debates and don't understand that Americans don't understand the difference between facts and fiction. She says, just offending all Americans on the last line of the show. You know what I mean? That's not what I mean. But anyway, if you're watching it, do let us know what you think. When is it on? I think it's on this weekend, isn't it, at some point? Right, we've got to the end of our show today. Fear not. We will be back tomorrow with another superb panel of guests talking about all the stories that matter most to you. Coming up next is GB News Live with the lovely Mark Longhurst. I'm Bev Turner and I'll see you tomorrow.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It stays breezy today and there will be further lines of showers rattling through. Some of these are going to be heavy with some thunder, but some drier interludes in between. Low pressure still in charge. Now that sent through a very active front last night. You might have been woken up if you're in the southwest or in Wales. There was some very noisy rain, some very strong winds associated with that, and the weather stays lively during the rest of the day. You can see how the bands of rain or showers are pushing in from the west and southwest, and it's always Wales and the southwest that will get the heaviest and most frequent downpours, but there'll be showers virtually everywhere, and some of these will be heavy with some rumbles of thunder. In between, a few sunny spells, but it stays blustery, 50-mile-per-hour winds near coast, 40 inland, and temperatures of 15 or 16 in the south, 11 to 13 further north. Now, through the evening, those showers just keep going. They'll come through at quite a pace during the hours of darkness. I think some clear spells in the east, but really around southern and southwestern shores in particular, those showers will just not stop through the night. On and off, but still with a gusty breeze accompanying them. That will keep things mild in the south. I think in the north of Scotland, that's the coldest spot overnight, 2 to 5 Celsius in some sheltered spots. Now, we start off with some brightness on Wednesday, some sunshine. There will still be some showers coming through, especially in the west and increasingly around the north of England, Irish sea coast. But actually, there'll be fewer showers for many compared with today. and some sunshine coming through, so 14 or 15 Celsius, less breezy, feeling a bit more pleasant with those gaps in between the weather. Now into the evening on Wednesday, the showers will turn to persistent rain across western Scotland and perhaps Northern Ireland as well, some drizzly stuff here. A lot of cloud thickening towards the west and especially the northwest. That's a sign of a change for the second half of the week. It's going to be unsettled in the northwest, drier in the southeast and warmer for all.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness, brilliant. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr.
Hello and a very warm welcome to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. And coming up today, they're at it again. The Just Stop Oil protesters bringing large parts of the M25 to a standstill for the second day in a row. Their actions came despite court orders banning their actions. The protesters say they won't be intimidated by changes to the law. So we'll be asking them why they think they should be above the law as well as above the motorway. Britain reportedly poised to announce a major gas deal with America. Could it solve our energy crisis? And what does it say about the PM's climate change ambitions just a day after that speech in Sharm el-Sheikh? More on the so-called wonder drug to treat breast cancer, now being made available